in all my work, I serve as a bridge builder. And so, I love these two together, the healer and the activism. I think I do my activism in a healing way. And I think that, that they fit so well together, because to me, they speak to where the healing is, or where the activism is coming from. I think so often we do activism from a place of pain and wound and hurt, but activism to me is a lot more powerful when it's from a place of from a healed space. When we come from those places of fear and love and hurt and pain, that you can't have that, put that in and have love come out the other end. And so it's only when we put love in, can we get love out the other end. My belief is that those things come up because the wound always wants to be healed. And so the disruption comes up as an opportunity for us to see what is trying to be healed and what's trying to bubble up to the surface. But there's different kinds of ways, or different ways to be an activist. This piece about we can't give what we don't have. I think the two different ways I describe them as a sprinter and a marathoner. And so which one are you? Because they require different things. And I think that has led to the sense of betrayal. Because so much of our activism work that we have going on is done in a sprinting kind of way. And so are there sprinting things? So they go out and they're gung-ho and we're protesting and fighting for things that we want. And it's a great way to change and move behavior. So if you want to get a policy change, we go out and we kind of pound on the door and make it happen, right? Which is really valuable and really important. It's an important piece of the work. I think one of the issues that we've come up against is you can't work like that forever. You can't sprint forever because you're going to get exhausted. And so our activism community it's worn out and burned out because they're doing sprinting in a marathon way. And so when we understand what the work is called for, so that if we're a sprinter, we need to then put in place rest stops. We need to then put in place, to hand the baton to the next person. We need to then, make sure we have practices that honor the nature of what's being asked. The other piece is the marathon piece. And the marathon piece is marathoners, they run and they're in for the long haul. And to me, those are the healers, because trauma will always float to the surface. And so what people are experiencing as kind of let down or disappointment in this new kind of wave of changing of policy that they fought so hard for to shift, it's because we never healed the underlying trauma. And trauma will always float to the surface. So the sprinters can change behavior for a short amount of time, but it doesn't change it forever if you're not doing the underlying healing of the work. So we need the sprinters and the marathoners to be doing their work at the same time. And I think that's why healing is so important to this work.
And what is doing the work? So sprinters and marathoners need to be doing the work at the same time. What is the work?
So the work for sprinters is the behavior change. It's what behavior you want to change, what strategic plan do you have to do that. You're going to go out and you're going to do policy change, or you're going out and you're protesting, you're getting, whatever it is that you're looking at moving. The marathon's work is the healing of the trauma. It's what is the root cause of why this issue is there to begin with. And so if we're not dealing with those root causes, then it will look all pretty because you can change behavior for a short period of time, or even for what looks like a long period of time. Here in Cincinnati, where I live, we have a thing that's called the collaborative agreement, where the government sued the city of Cincinnati because in a 3-year period, there's something like, I think it was 8 African-American men who were shot and killed by the police. And so they sent in the government and kind of sued the city, and the city came up with this large-scale community engagement to talk about shifts and how we were going to be together. And the result of it was actually pretty wonderful. Like they implemented some policy changes, like the policemen ended up carrying their tasers, pulling out their tasers first instead of their guns. So people were getting tased, but they weren't dying. And for 10 years, we didn't have not one police shooting here, or a killing of a citizen anyway, here in Cincinnati. And so 10 years and not having a death, that's a pretty, you know, important thing. And that was because the sprinters were able to go in and do that initial work. And how it started was we had a coalition here who started collecting the stories of the citizens and took it to the government and said, we need you to come in and intervene on our behalf. So, but when they did that, they didn't implement practices that were healing the wound that this city has that would cause for the police shootings in the first place. So the behavior shift happened, but then nothing was healed, so that trauma slowly starts bubbling to the surface until we see it again. And then 2 years ago now, we've had the shooting and the killing of Sam Du Bois here in the city. For our generation, I think the task that's in front of us is that we have to grow up. We have so many of us that are adolescent adults walking around instead of initiated adults. And so we have to, before we can even think of stepping into elderhood, we have to become initiated adults. We have to become really clear about our own healing and to step into that work so we can have clarity around what's really being called of us individually. And then when we have initiated adults, then what happens is we can have initiated elders. But if you don't have initiated adults, you can't have initiated elders. And if you don't have initiated elders, you can't initiate the youth. So part of what's happening is the millennial age and group is they're looking for these elders who, for the most part, don't exist because we're not growing up. We're just, you know, as a whole, our culture are just these, you know, I always say adolescent adults in these grown people's bodies, right? And so we think we're adults, but we're really not. And part of, you know, what we're seeing reflected back to us in our administration is that adolescent adult. And that's giving us clues about what wants to be healed in us. And then for the millennial generation, I think what's being called of them is to seek out those elders, to seek out the elders and know that it does exist and it is out there. I think they've been so disappointed because they've come across just what I say, instead of elders, old people. And they think that elders don't exist, but they are out there. I've had some wonderful elders in my life. And so I think that's their task, because once they find elders, elders will help pour into them what's needed for their next step and their next step. Now, that doesn't mean that, and I don't mean to imply that elders have all the answers for millennials, because that's not what the job of an elder is to do. The elder is to help you discover your own answers. And I think that that's a big part of what the millennials have been looking for.
And what do you see as the relationship between love and power?
Oh, I love that question. And there's actually there is a quote by Martin Luther King, and I would love to find it. I think I have it here pretty quickly, but it's a quote about love and power, and I think it describes it to me better than anything I've heard before. And let's see, I'm gonna find it if you just have a minute here. It's that power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. And to me, that's my definition about the relationship between love and power. You know, it's how do we hold both of those? And also, I think, how do we understand power as not just being external, but being internal? You know, power isn't just a position, a relationship with someone, a job, a title. Power internally is, it survives when all of that other stuff falls away. Money, you know, power internally stands. It's the example that Nelson Mandela gave us. You know, he was in jail, but he was still powerful because it was an internal thing. It wasn't an external condition. And so how do we step more and more into our internal power? My last thoughts would be that healing is hard. and that it's painful. And that's why most of us avoid it. You know, it's much easier to look externally and to see what's wrong with the world instead of to look internally and see what's wrong in the world, how it's showing up what's really inside of us, and that's what's being healed. We think that if we heal the world, we'll heal ourselves, when it's just the opposite. Only by healing ourselves do we heal the world. And, you know, but it's not an easy thing. A friend once asked me, actually I had two people in the same day ask me, two friends, how do you hold this experience in or how do you pour kindness all over this situation? And then the second person said, how do you hold this in a kind container? And my response to them is, that's not the real question, because healing is a destructive process. It's a breaking down of what we've believed to be true. And so it's, how do you hold a destructive process in a kind container? That's the job that we're being called to do, you know, and that's a lot more difficult than just pouring kindness all over it.
Quanita, thank you for your time.
Thank you for your invitation. So grateful.
Thank you for your wisdom. I think I actually have one last thing. Like, what do you think would allow this conversation to be scaled up? Like, what do you think would support this conversation to like catch fire in the experience that you've had of having this conversation, and what alerts people's minds? Like, if we wanted this conversation, everyone, like in America for now, and in the world eventually, to be in this conversation, like what are the core kind of points that are most alive for where people are right now that you've seen kind of stimulate interest pretty quickly?
I don't know. I don't know if it's supposed to be. I think part of what we need to step out of is, I think we try to be other people's gods all the time, and we think we know what people need and should have right now. But when something isn't for someone, it can actually be harmful. And so I think that the way that it works, though, is that consciousness shows up on a collective plane for all of us. And then when we're ready, we each individually tap into it one by one. But because we're connected, when one of us does it, it makes it easier for the next person to do it, and easier for the next person to do it, and easier for the next person to do it. You know, it's that it makes a groove in the universe, which makes it easier for the next person. And so for me, I surrender the trying to know who's supposed to have it and when, and that it may just be that the seed is planted in a small group of people now, and that's what's being called for because of what they're going out in the world and doing. Or it may be that it does catch fire with everybody, and that's what's supposed to happen. But I think that it will have a life of its own. And so our job is how to surrender that, you know, and because we're so taught that we can control everything and plan everything and know everything, and we just can't. You know, that's gotten us into the place that we're in now.